Hey fellas, it's Dom here, and today we have a special little tier list video where I'll be doing a tier list on the creature types in Legends, or at least the main ones which you could probably make a almost full deck out of, and I'll be ranking them on their kind of viability, how well they help other cards with synergy, and just how strong they are. So these are the races that I will be going over. Yes, this video is called creature type tier list rather than race tier list, because I don't want to make an apology video in a week's time. But anyway, onto these ones. We have the bestial races. Yes, I know an orc can be also considered an elf because it's awesomer, but I just put it in there so it's easier to get through chunk by chunk. We've got Argonian, Khajiit, orcs. We've got Nords, Bretons, Imperials, Red Guards, Dark Elves, Wood Elves, High Elves, and then the extra ones that we've added are Vampires, Werewolves, Skeletons, Dwemer, Factotums, Daedra, Dragons, and Goblins. And that's all we're going to go over in this video. But we'll start off with the beast races, and we'll start off with orcs, because orcs are all about kind of summoning one orc while you have another one on the board, or supporting the ones already on the board. And this does mean that it has a few good, cool combos, but they are usually very much specified to working with other orcs. Some exceptions and some of the highlighted cards are shown below for each of the races, by the way. But with orcs, a lot of their strategies do rely on getting out unit after unit. But the thing is, none of their units are that strong. They do have cards like Durzog to try and limit max magicka to 7, but that obviously affects you as well, and means that you can't play loads of units if you need to, depending on what your hand is. So the thing is with orcs is that they're alright, they're not amazing, but compared to the other races they kind of fall kind of low and a bit flat, because things like Gortwog are just really great for kind of grabbing things out their deck, and there's obviously the Archer, which is good support removal, but they don't have too much which is kind of viable in every situation. They've just got a lot of kind of almost buff cards in a way, with a few bits here and there, so they're not the greatest. Next we have Khajiit, which is all about pilfering and hitting your opponent directly, and they do somewhat fall into the same issue as orcs of having not very many strong monsters, as well as very much needing to hit face. They do have ways of getting around units, like movement mechanics or even ignoring guards, but they don't really have much for genuinely dealing with units, as a lot of their kind of techniques are about just directly hitting face. And the more you ignore your opponent's cards, the more that they can build up, which is obviously quite a big threat and can get very, very powerful if left for too long. So, although they are quite good, they're also kind of falling behind in a way, while Argonians, on the other hand, are all about buffing up your magicka, and they do have some good options for defending yourself, like Fighters Guild Recruit, as well as removal, like Shadowfen Priest. And the fact is that not only do they have this way of buffing up magicka, which is very useful, especially in decks which live and thrive in the late game, but they also have ways of delaying to get there, which is really good for the removal side. Hence, I believe it's better than the other two here. So when we go over to this tier list, you'll see that we have 6 columns, and I'm going to put the Argonian in They'll Be Gentle, which is definitely not a kink thing, and we'll put Orc and Khajiit in Milk Drinker, just one below, because they aren't as good as Argonians, or kind of viability-wise, but I'd say that this edge is only somewhat better, so it wouldn't be going up any higher tiers than just one above those two. But other than that, we'll move on to the humanoid races next. So starting off with the Nords, these guys are all about breaking runes, and have a lot more abilities once a rune has been broken, as well as getting synergy off with that. And this is really good, but the thing that makes Nords exceptionally great is that they also have cards from the Heroes of Skyrim DLC, which bring in things like Beast Form and Shout synergy, which is excellent and allows for several different playstyles, as obviously the usual Relentless Raider, Ulfric's Housecarl, kind of beat down Crusader is exceptionally good, but Nords can also go into more of a Shout deck with Ulfric and Greybeards, or it can do whatever you need to in between, which is actually excellent, which makes Nords a very, very strong contender on this tier list. Bretons are all about wards, but a lot of their cards kind of move away from it, as there isn't too much they can do with wards. Like, you'll see a few cards for Bretons which are more leaning towards conjuration, like the Tutor, And they do have some really nice kind of opening cards, like Old Velothi Assassin, which is obviously really great because not only has it got Lethal to get rid of big units, but it's also got Rally, so if you do get it early, you can start buffing up your hand more and more. Although the issue is, Bressons don't have too much else, so they kind of fall flat when compared to some of the other kind of creature types in the game. But they do have some really nice ideas. Wards can be used in a very powerful manner, but you need to do some like funky synergy and make sure you got the right cards like Ward Crafter to kind of get those wards back. Next we have Imperial, which are all about swarming the board. And a lot of these cards will either be about buffing your units when you do swarm, or you can get some other different cards which maybe go down the healing and draining route, as well as, you know, cards like Penitus, Oculatus Agents, who steal your opponent's keywords, which is a very good ability, to be honest, as it can get past guards, and having that healing as well is obviously excellent. But the thing is, if you look through their entire collection, they do begin to fall flat once you get past the occasional unit buffs and the other cards like that. There isn't too much to them, and because of that reliability on having a lot of units to throw at your opponent, there are some parts of their kind of archetype which aren't as good as others. So I'd say Imperials are good, they're nice, but they aren't anything amazing. They're more mid-range, possibly a bit above some of the other ones, but not going to be kind of top tier. And then finally we have Red Guards, which are all about items. And I did have a look through all of these cards, obviously, or have a skim through. And Red Guards do not have that many good legendaries. They've got about 2, maybe 3 at a push, which are, you know, very well viable. And the thing is with buff cards, which makes them really annoying, is that 1 bit of removal can get rid of it. They do have some really nice cards at slowing down your opponents at using removal, but the emphasis there needs to go on the word slowing them down, not stopping them, so it doesn't get as high a place as it might want to. So we're going to put Nords in the ironically named You're Finally Awake for being a very, very good kind of creature type. We'll put Imperials and they'll be gentle, because, I mean, you have to throw a lot of weak units. They will be gentle how much they just pepper your cards to a rate where it becomes bad. But no, it's good, but it's not amazing. And then we put Breton and Redguard down in Milk Drinker, because these kind of creature types here, they're just alright. They could be better. They're the ones that I'd say need a bit more support to be on par with the rest. But they're still good. They definitely do have playstyles that they can use. And I wouldn't say they're rubbish. It's just when compared to others, they aren't as great. Right, so moving over to the Elves, we have Dunmer, Bosmer and Ortmer, or Dark Elf, Wood Elf and High Elf, in case you're not too familiar with the terms. So Dark Elves are probably one of the best in the game, as the Houses of Morrowind expansion added several different multi-attributes, which obviously Dunmers were the key point of, as it was the Houses of Morrowind DLC. And this does mean that not only have you got a lot of very good cards for Dark Elves, but you've got a lot of different things they can do, which is obviously very strong. Like, for instance, you've got the Rally cards, you've got the Tribunal Betray cards, you have the ones that Exalt, you've got loads of different abilities of Dark Elves. And the thing is, you can even get just some of the best cards from the original sets. Like, Balmora Spymaster, for instance. It is a bit of an RNG card, and is quite funny, but can be really strong. Silent Pilgrim's excellent at grabbing your multi-attribute cards, and just, you know, getting cards which usually you might not be able to draw, and getting specific thinning. And of course, Galen the Shelterer makes certain archetypes playable when they usually wouldn't be, so Dunmers are getting a high spot, basically, is what I'm trying to say here. They're very good. Now, moving over to Wood Elves, this is probably the other end of the spectrum where they haven't received much love at all, as Wood Elves are all about having cards which are weakened, so, or not you having cards, but weakening your opponent's cards, and then using other cards to finish them off, and there's bits of hints of lethal here and there. And the thing is, there's really not that many high Wood Elf cards. There's only 2 legendaries, which I'd say are pretty much very viable. The others are a bit questionable. And the thing is, like with cards like Leaf Lurker, they're just better finish-offs, which are, you know, 2-cost removal cards usually. And the thing is, Corner Club Gambler, one of the better cards with their attribute, or their creature type, sorry, is not always the best, because if your opponent's got the right amount of removal, they can just get rid of it, you lose a card, and then don't get its draw power. So I'm going to say that Wood Elves are going to go quite low. And then finally, High Elves are all about using actions and buffing off those actions. And they do have a really nice array of things, as well as Arcano, who can do these very cheeky wins when your opponent's on 5 health. So High Elves are probably going to go in the middle of these two. And if we look at the tier list again, I've decided that Dark Elves are going to go with Nords in your Finally Awake. The High Elves will go, they'll be gentle because they're pretty good. They're above some of the other races. And then I'm going to have to say that Wood Elves are probably the weakest of the 10 main races in Elder Scrolls Legends. Please don't hate me if that's your main. I'm sorry. It's just me going over my opinion. Because obviously this is subjective. You'll probably want to move this around. But I'll be interested to know what you guys would have put here and where. Right, and now to move on to the kind of sub-creature types. We've got Werewolf, which is a very, very small one, and I've linked it with Beast form for this, Vampires, and Skeletons. So starting off with Werewolves, like I said, they're probably on the smallest in the game, as most of their cards do come from Nords with Beast form. However, you do still have that creature type when they transform, and you do get a few interesting cards here and there, so I thought I'd include it. And honestly, I'd say that the main thing that Beast form, or Werewolves as a whole, would need for support would just be a few more cards here and there. Because Beast form abilities are really good. They are somewhat difficult to get off because you only get 5 opportunities per game. Maybe 6 or 7 if your opponent's really getting their runes back through doing miraculous things with, you know, Maroki and other cards like that. But the thing is that these cards they're very good once you get them out, but they're quite difficult to get out properly when you need them to with the right setup to get the optimal build. And the thing is, when you add all these ifs and whens into what make them good, it does question their kind of viability. Aspect of Hircine's a god card though, I love that. Just summoning a 6/6 charge and slapping the opponent in the face, or having a 12/12 guard if you know your opponent's not going to have the removal to stop it. So I'd say Werewolves, they have a few nice cards, it's just they don't really have enough to be considered a good enough creature type. While moving on to Vampires, we kind of see a similar problem where the cards are really good, especially the higher cost ones, but it does have that issue of there's not that many, and the ones that you do have are mostly expensive cards, and because of that you're obviously going to need to like get your Magicka high up quickly. Now the thing is with Vampires is that they do have blood magic spells from 2 specific cards, but obviously these cards are very susceptible to removal if it does happen, and they do need to at least get their conditions off to get these blood magic cards, which are random, so could get you something not very useful for the situation you're in. And as these cards won't always be like grabbing you vampires either that they're giving you, it can mean that you won't have too much to work with. But I would say as a support archetype, vampires are very nice and very cool. It just needs a bit more kind of bulking it up to make it better. And then finally we have Skeleton, which of these 3 can work very well as a deck on its own, but it does fall to other things if you don't properly build a Training Grounds deck around a pure Skeleton deck. As obviously things like Bone Colossus, they're great for just swarm and buff at the same time, while Hallowed Death Priest is excellent at removal. But the thing is, it's just the issue of these cards do kind of need other things to support it to make it proper. But I would say of the 3 here, Skeletons is very, very like best. It's the best one for all round, while Vampires is stronger the card it's got. So because of that, I'd say that the all round viability of Skeletons is good, but it just needs a few more big cards to properly support it to make it a much better archetype. So therefore, because of this, and these are kind of how they work together, I'll put Vampires and Milk Drinker just for having that power advantage with the stronger cards, while I'll put Skeletons and Werewolves in Stole Your Sweet Roll as a bit below. Because again, all 3 of these, they just need more cards which would help them in certain areas, and I mean, it's not really their fault of an archetype. They're good as supporting ones, but just not as the main deal, and because of that they do fall a bit flat because they aren't able to cover certain areas. Okay, so we'll now move on to the automatons, dwellers and factotums. Now, I absolutely love neutral as like just running a neutral deck because it's a bit of a meme. However, the thing is, Dwemer genuinely has some really, really strong cards, but the thing is, it's just not really that amazing. going pure neutral. If you do a pure neutral deck, or not pure neutral, but a heavily neutral deck with support here and there, it is pretty good actually. It's not too bad. But the issue is that Halls of the Dwemer is such a key card. And the thing is, if you just don't have anything to draw supports, or your opponent has support removal, like Dismantle, which just takes down your entire deck pretty much, you're a little bit screwed. And just relying so heavily on one thing for a good bit of deck synergy just isn't really viable as an archetype. But no, I do really like Dwemers and Factotums, but it's just, this is an issue that Dwemer suffers with. And then Factotums, their issue is they just don't have enough cards. Like, I understand why they don't have many cards, because obviously it would make them completely busted if every card in your deck got this or that. But it would be nice if, say, certain cards like, what's the Build-A-Bear version of, it's not for Factotums, it's like Automatons or Fabricants. Fabricate, that's it. Fabricate, the Build-A-Bear cards I like to call it. If that made Automatons, that would be great, because they wouldn't be getting the buffs until you made them, and then they'd just be sitting in your hand. I mean, you'd maybe have to give it a power limit, so it couldn't be like a 11 cost card with Breakthrough, Regenerate, Lethal Guard, for instance. Or, like, in the custom card video I made, maybe make a 5 cost 1-2 with Ward, which is also Factotum. So it's a very, very weak card, stat-wise, unless you play it in Factotums. But it's just have a few more cards like that is what I'd say they need to be much stronger. And because of this, it will absolutely break my heart. Because, as I said, Factotums is probably one of my most favourite, like, archetypes in the game. Although I think alone, they don't really offer too much, and they can't even produce much synergy. They're more something you run as like a second backup plan. I'm going to have to put Factotums in Dive Rock Fodder, unfortunately, because it is just the worst of the lot here. And then Dwemer, I'm putting it in Stole Your Sweet Roll, but I can understand arguments for it to maybe go up to Milk Drinker, because it does have some very nice cards in for a pure neutral deck. It's just, again, the issue of running pure neutral. You're missing out some really key cards for attributes, and if you add those attributes, well then you're kind of saturating your deck in a way where you might not be drawing the right cards. Right, and for the final three we have Goblins, Daedra, and Dragons. Now, Goblins is a personal favourite of mine. It's very close to my heart. I've got to respect it a lot. However, it's not that amazing as a whole. It goes very well into the game and has some nice synergy with other cards, but realistically, Goblins are going to be just quite good. They're not going to be amazing. They're not going to be top tier. But yeah, you can have a lot of fun with Goblins, and you do have a lot of nice combos like War Chief to drain something and then use a curse to destroy it, and then having things like Bloody Handchef to buff off those curses. They do kind of link together for synergy very well. And I'm not even too sure what they could do to make Goblins like top tier, but I'll say they're more balanced tier. As much as people hate on them in the comments, especially when I play Goblins, because I do love a good game of Goblins, I would say they are a nice, fun archetype for the game. Now let's move on to the elephant in the room, or the Daedra in the Oblivion Gate, as you could say. These fellas, all I can say is they're just really, really good. Like, Daedra cards are so good because they can cover almost everything. They've got mid-range abilities, they've got aggro abilities, they've got kind of control abilities, especially with actions and items and other cards that make sense with them. So the fact that we've Invade on top as well just overall makes them a very strong archetype as a whole. And a not very, or a somewhat decently built Daedra deck is a force to be reckoned with. It's scary, and the fact that they've got consistently good cards from low costs, like 1 costs, 2 costs, all the way up to having some really strong 10, 11 cost cards, which alongside Oblivion Gates, which they can create, is insane. And this insane strength is kind of some of the things with Invade that people aren't a fan of, and is hence the reason I'm not allowed to play Invade on this channel without destroying the channel, because that's, you know, a very scary thought. But anyway, last but not least, Dragons. Now, Dragons are really good, actually. but the one issue with them is that they are very much balanced towards the higher magicka costs. Although admittedly, once they get there, things like Colgratined, or how do you say this? I'm sorry, okay, I can't remember how to say his name, just don't beat me up about it. Halls of the Colossus basically is great at grabbing other big dragons. And then obviously your unique legendary dragons are incredibly strong as well. So this means that dragons are really good, but they do need to get to the later games. So you need to make sure that you have the right cards alongside them, as the idea of dragons is to have these very strong but high cost units. It's like buff, but you don't need to actually buff the units, as I like to say. So you do have to worry about removal here and there, but the thing is, because they're all about getting to the late game, you'll get to a point where you can summon a couple a turn, and removal becomes a bit less of an issue, so they're going to end up high on the tier list. So let's take one final look at it. We're going to put Daedra in top, we'll put dragons in your Finally Awake, and then we'll put goblins in They'll Be Gentle, because we all love goblins, surely. And this is my personal final tier list with these archetypes. I am very interested to see what you guys would have done with this. Probably a bit different here and there, even though I look at this and go, maybe move Dwemer up one, maybe move like Red Guards or Bretons down one. But hey, that's just my opinion. I'm interested to see what yours are, and I hope you did enjoy me rant on about this for like 20 minutes. Oh god, it's been 20 minutes. But anyway, if you have enjoyed, obviously, liking and subscribing helps me out, and I'll see you next time.